During a time when most extend season's greetings in the NWA, it becomes season's beatings. I'm John Rentham with the retro view of NWA WCW Clash of Champions 4 Seasons Beatings. Where yes, the NWA towns beat the shit out of each other in the UTC Arena in Chattanooga, Tennessee, in preparation for Starrcade 88 True Grit. So yeah, by this point, the NWA, while still pretty much a hotbed for real professional wrestling as far as the Carolinas and the environs, and as far as how people would perceive WWF television, even though WWF honestly had a lot of really good talents, it was all about presentation, there were a lot of things going on behind the scenes with the NWA, since this was the first Clash of the Champions under the Turner ownership. Jim Crockett had sold to Ted Turner either late October, early November, whatever it was, and now it was all up to Ted Turner and the people that he put in charge, and that's been told and told and retold and retold and all the way home told by Jim Cornette, by Eric Bischoff, by various people. I mean, it would take forever. Various wrestlers have talked about it. It would be an extensive series to talk about all that stuff. And as a fan, it would be me just giving you second or third hand information because I wasn't there. I wasn't even there. It was Owen. But in all seriousness, the Clash of Champions actually meant something at this point. Even though if you compare how the first Clash or even the second Clash went to this one, and knowing all the stuff behind the scenes, and I'll talk about those things, briefly while I talk about the matches. Yeah, this was where once we got to Starrcade 88, then they brought George Scott in, and Dusty Rhodes had been fired as booker. He went to Florida, tried to start his own promotion, all that stuff, all this crazy shit's going on. And then he would go as the common man, working hard, and shaking his can. He's the American dream. Totally screwed that up, but yeah. Ted Turner, he loved wrestling, but as Ric Flair put it, he didn't micromanage it. Anyway, the synth music and the narration, talking about the matches and showing clips and everything, including the Road Warriors sticking the spike in Dusty Rhodes' eye, leading to the eye for an eye thing. Not Eye for an Eye with Sally Field and Kiefer Sutherland. I think that's his name. That was certainly a movie that just screams fucking 90s. Good goddamn Christ. The 90s had a lot of revenge-minded movies, now that you think about it. So JR and Bob Caudle call the action. And I'm going to be perfectly honest. Outside of the main event, the crowd was hot for some of this show. Especially for one thing that was basically just an angle. And yes, the NWA crowd certainly add a lot of just gravitas and just a lot of just incredible energy to these shows because they were super into it. But then by this time, the following year, they'd almost be sitting on their goddamn hands because you had George Scott and Jim Herd and all that. But if we get to the first match, it's Ron Simmons and Eddie Gilbert against Fulton and Rogers, the Fantastics. It's a U.S. Tag Team Tournament Finals, and actually, Simmons and Gilbert had lost a match to the Sheepherders. And, this whole thing that was going on. The U.S. tag titles had actually been, part of the Midnight Express's, outfits and everything. As Dusty Rhodes said, according to Jim Cornette, these are your belts. The part of your gear, they go with you. I miss Dusty. Even with his bad ideas, and he had bad ideas, man, when his ideas were good, they were really fucking good. But Simmons and Gilbert lost to Sheepherders, and then the Sheepherders became the Bushwhackers in WWF, and they were like, okay, Simmons, Gilbert, get back in there and do something. I know there's stuff that happened on television and everything, but it's like that would take forever to go over. The whole point is, the Midnight Express were U.S. Tag Team Champions. They lost to the Fantastics earlier in 88. Great series of matches that they had. Blow-off was during the Great American Bash 88 tour. Midnight Express then beat Ole and Arn in Philadelphia when they left in mid-September of 88. And then they lost the tag titles, the world tag titles, that is, to the Road Warriors in New Orleans, I believe. And they also relinquished the U.S. tag titles. That is why we have this tournament. And then the Sheepherders left and became the Bushwhackers and everything and did all this stuff and whatever and doing the thing and licking the face and doing that and wee, Merry Christmas and all that to the Sheepherders. Go look at how the Sheepherders, Luke and Butch, how they were as, very violent, vicious, bloodthirsty heels. And then take a look at how they were as the Bushwhackers. They were already, I think, in their early to mid-40s when they became the Bushwhackers. And they got a new lease on life because they wouldn't have even been walking if they had worked that style for another couple years. So, all that stuff going on with the U.S. tag titles, and we have this. Simmons and Gilbert against Fulton and Rogers. And Jason Hervey of the Wonder Years was in the crowd. He was certainly somebody that they could get on camera. Power versus speed. Simmons was very, very much in the beginning of his career. I mean, he'd been working for a little bit. Gilbert, obviously coming from a wrestling family, his dad, his lesser talented brother. Eddie was actually pretty good, but he did have a car wreck a few years before. I think it might have been around the same time as the Jimmy Snuka and Nancy Argentino incident or soon after. Around that time. I think it happened in 83, 84 at the latest. But Eddie still had that strut. He had that, ability to understand wrestling, and he was good at getting people to hate him. The thing is, though, I think the fans ended up ultimately kind of hating some of this match because even though they were into it, this went, and I'm not fucking kidding, nearly 30 minutes. Now, it's a 1 hour and 49-minute program because they cut the commercials out, obviously. As cool as it would be to see the old commercials, they cut the commercials out, so that was the television runtime for this particular thing. And Simmons got some pops for his power, especially the power slam catch that he did to Fulton, which was great. And Bobby Fulton and Tommy Rogers, by the way, just in case you're wondering. Not Duck Rogers in the 24th and a half century. Had the silly thing in reverse. If this had been cut down by 10 minutes, I think this would be remembered better. And I understand why. They only had 5 matches. They had a good talent roster. Given the next match, they obviously could have put another match on. In fact, this probably should have been 7 matches deep, and they really should have hyped up more of the matches for the Starrcade card. Now, I get it. You don't want to give stuff away. That's how Dusty's mindset was. And even though the spike in the eye angle would lead to him getting fired soon after, especially, I believe, right after Starrcade 88, I think he might have been fired as Booker, and he might have still been a wrestler around Starrcade 88. Nevertheless, hard to tell, honestly. Dusty just would end up leaving, but Dusty appeared a little bit later. Gilbert had a hurt arm. Fantastics, focused on that. And yeah, I hate to say this, but if this had been cut down, this would have honestly gone a lot better. We did get a post roll-up, 1, 2, 3, and nearly 30 minutes, and it should have been 20 max. In fact, I would argue that about 15 would have been perfect. And yeah, the Fantastics got some serious boos, actually, when they became champions. They got some cheers, because Fulton Rogers, and they're fantastic, pardon the pun. But then Schiavone talks to Lex, who was not a natural speaker at this point. And Lex also was in the beginning of really ascending. I mean, he'd been in Florida, he'd been put in the Horsemen, broke away from the Horsemen, had that great series of matches with Rick, would have another match at Starrcade 88, True Grit. And then we get to Dr. Death Steve Williams versus the Italian Stallion, the man with the world's largest head, according to Jim Cornette. Booze for Sullivan, and booze for everybody in this match. Booze forever. I think booze was probably what somebody was consuming to give the Italian Stallion 15 minutes against Dr. Death Steve Williams. This should have been 7 minutes. By the way, JR talks to Mike Rotunda and Kevin Sullivan before the match, who are part of the Varsity Club. Dr. Death Steve Williams had just joined them. Mike Rotunda, who would later become IRS, just in case you're only a WWF fan. But you might recognize him and just can't think, that looks like the tax man. He's a tax man. Anyway, Dr. Death Steve Williams is in the ring, and Italian Stallion are in the ring. But first, they're talking about Rick Steiner, Rotunda, and Sullivan. Stupid Steiner is stupid. How stupid is he? They're doing fucking Abbott and Costello and all that shit and whatever. Yeah, this should have been 7 minutes max. Stallion should have not gotten in that much offense. It's not even that he was bad in the ring, but seriously, Dr. Death should have just basically squashed him. Yeah. The referee did not see Sullivan attacking him, attacking Stallion, as Dr. Death won with the Oklahoma Stampede. And way longer, I would actually argue this should have gone 5 minutes and it should have been a third of what it was. Magnum TA talks to JYD, who is fresh off of WWF television, had left sometime after Mania 4, I believe. I think actually he might have been on the SummerSlam 88 card, if I remember right. And that would be his last appearance, major appearance on WWF television. Was he okay in the head? Probably not at this point. On my way to the NWA. Really feel bad for JYD. It really is a shame that his career went downhill and he passed away when he did. Starrcade 88 plug. Ivan Koloff versus Paul Jones. Number 1, Paul Jones. Nikita had left the NWA shortly before this, or a bit of time before this, and I believe that was due to his wife at the time had some illness. It was some illness that unfortunately did end up leading to her passing. I forget what it was, but Nikita, being an honorable man, taking care of her. He would come back to wrestling a little bit later. It's just a real shame about that. Ivan had one hand tied behind his back, and there was cheating, and Paul Jones ended up falling to the foreign object. They called it a foreign object until Ted Turner didn't want to use the word foreign, wanted to use the word international, and then JR and Bob Caudle started making fun of it, calling it an international object, which was funny, because JR was funny then. Ivan won, then the Russian assassins attacked him, attacking Ivan Koloff, who by this point, you would think the Russian Bear wouldn't be a face. No, he was, because people appreciated just what Ivan Koloff brought to wrestling, and he was on the tail end of his career. He would work a few more years, but they loved him. JYD comes down to make the save, gets a pretty good pop. Shivani and Luger are talking. Luger says he has been an admirer of JYD's work for a long time. Luger admitted in a documentary, by the way, I believe his biography, that the first wrestling show he had ever seen was the first match, or was the first show that he was on. So I don't know how much of JYD's work he admired, especially when that was 86, and JYD's best days were a bit before that. Why was Luger still talking? They gave Luger a lot of mic time, and it didn't work. More Starrcade 88 plugs, and then Dusty and Road Warrior Animal are going to fight for control of the NWA 6-man championships, because the aforementioned spike in the eye and all that shit. But first, Magnum talked to Rick Steiner, who has friend Alex, who was a hand puppet. Hand puppet. Beep, 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 beep. I don't know why the hell I'm doing that. I wasn't going to draw something on my goddamn hand and, do the talk thing. I just wasn't going to do that because I didn't feel like doing that. So nevertheless, this is more of an angle match. Dusty was late to the venue, so they killed time. And then Dusty hits bionic elbow on Paul Ellering. Him and Animal tangle a bit. He smashes Animal's leg into the post a couple times. Ends up knocking the ref out of the ring inadvertently. Ellering runs in. Dusty has a patch over his eye. Ow, my eye. I'm not supposed to get Road Warrior in it. And then Dusty tries to go for his eye. And then he gets one of those plastic chairs with steel, or, with metal legs. And JR has to say he hit him with a steel chair. He hit him with a plastic chair, JR. I know Oklahoma doesn't understand some things, like the winds that come sweeping down the plain, and away we go. In all seriousness, that wasn't a steel chair, and everybody with even halfway working, Leroy McGurk could have seen that wasn't a steel chair, and Leroy McGurk had been blind for a while. Leroy McGurk was also a racist son of a bitch. So that ends up leading to a DQ. And because Dusty had one of the 6-man titles, and Animal had one of them, and Hawk obviously had the other, that would lead to the Road Warriors selecting somebody, as I forget who they selected, as their partner, or as their 6-man partner. They also had the NWA World Tag titles. Then here's Hawk, then here's Sting. They show in, and they show up, and then the chair gets used for a DQ. So much stuff going on. The crowd was into it, I'll say that much. And this would lead to their tag title match at Starrcade. I've already reviewed Starrcade 88 if you want to check it out on the the Old School Wrestling Reviews playlist. I think it's Old School Wrestling Reviews and Documentary Reviews. But nevertheless, Midnight Express, Eaton and Lane with Jim Cornette, rest in peace Bobby Eaton, against Ric Flair and Barry Windham with JJ. And here you go. You got Flair is a world champion. Barry Windham as a U.S. champion. Midnight Express, top tier tag team. One of the Mount Rushmore tag teams, or on my Mount Rushmore tag teams personally. And you could have Condrey and Eaton, Lane and Eaton. Randy Rose and Condrey were actually pretty good in all seriousness. And so Eaton, he was so goddamn good. He was so fucking good. Finally, something good on this program is what I noted. And it was a great pace. The crowd was popping. You could definitely tell all these. When the worst, and I'm not even saying the worst, but when you have guys that are so goddamn good, and Stan Lane is probably the least accomplished of any of them in the ring, that's saying something. Because Stan Lane was very, very good. Very good. Great in tag teams, probably great in singles as well, but great just as far as working with Eaton. Great talker. Paul Lee then jumps in with a pre-tape threatening Cornette and the Midnight Express to build up to their match at Starrcade 88. A lot of build for Starrcade 88. And then they just would, they bop back and forth, da-da-da-da-da. And Eaton would end up hitting a leg drop. And after Cornette and JJ were tangling, one of JJ's shoes would be used by Flair. Hits Eaton in the back of the head. Cover, 1, 2, 3. So they had to cheat. They had to resort to, dirty tactics to beat the Midnight Express when they were beaten. Cornette cuts a promo on everybody, praises Flair, praises Windham, but says, Flair, you had to cheat to beat the Midnight Express. Midnight Express, further proving that they are the elite of tag teams. The differences between the Midnight Express and the elite is the Midnight Express were actual wrestlers. So, and then he says Paul Ellering. Well, Paul Ellering can be next, but Paul Lee and the original Midnight are next. And then Lex is talking about how he's in top tier condition. He will face Ric Flair at True Grit. And that is it. That is it for Seasons Beatings. Hooray! So anyway, let me know your thoughts on this show in the comments. Please like, share, subscribe, Twitter handle in the description. I'm John Retlin. I'll see you soon.